All right, welcome back. So the debate over vaccines is back in the headlines all over North America right now because dozens of measles cases has now come in to play. This was, completely wiped out back as far as 2000, but thanks to parents who believe in junk science, a very dumb blonde, they don't vaccinate their kids. And so now kids are exposing other kids, vulnerable, and they are posing a real threat to others, like my next guest, whose 11-month-old son is now in isolation out of fear that he came into contact with measles. Her name is Heather Stockin. She joins me now. Good to see you.
Hey.
So you're a new mom to an 11-month-old son named
Yes.
Noah. You took your little one to a pediatric clinic over the weekend, and what happened?
Unbeknownst to us, there was a child who was later diagnosed with measles. And so a few days later, we were told that Noah was now, he's been exposed and that he's a high-risk case.
Obviously, Noah, too young to get the vaccination. I think you have to wait till a year.
Yeah,
he
was 11 months. You have to wait till 12 months, so he missed it by a month to the day. He wasn't vaccinated, so he became exposed, high risk. He had to be rushed to an emergency clinic for an immune globulin, which is a shot that gives him antibodies. It's hopefully going to temporarily immunize him if he doesn't have the virus, or if he does have it, because we don't know yet. If he does have it, it'll help him fight it, hopefully.
And so he's isolated now for 3 weeks.
Yes.
So you and Dad, Gershon, now have to wait 3 weeks watching every day to see if he develops a virus that is extremely dangerous, especially for babies. I would say under 2, but seriously.
Yeah, it's a leading cause of death in children. And he's in isolation, so he can't leave the house. We can't have people over unless they're immunized, and they have to be comfortable with that. Can't go to work. If we go out, we have to get a sitter. He's had to drop out of all his classes. We've lost the money, but above everything, we're terrified. It's horrible to have to watch your kid and see if he develops a life-threatening disease for 3 weeks.
Yeah, and so you had to take him to this clinic. Oh, he's so cute. Look at him there. And there's your dog playing with him. And so you had to take him to this clinic to get the shot. What did Toronto Health say to you? Because as it turns out, I think you were in the same room, treatment room, as a child that was possibly affected.
Yeah, just a few feet away. Honestly, I don't remember the full conversation. It was so shocking. You don't expect that. They just called and they said, your child's been exposed. He's high risk. Get him vaccinated right now.
Right. And so now he's been injected with this emergency. Yeah. But the problem is he should have gotten his shots next month.
Right.
And so now he can't get those shots.
Right. So as soon as the immunoglobulin wears off, it'll stay with him for about 2 months, we're told. And like I said, it'll be, if he doesn't have the measles, it'll serve as an immunization for about 2 months. But after that, for I think another 3 months, he won't be protected because he can't get the vaccine until then.
And we have these cases now cropping up, which means essentially your son is going to be at further risk. Do you now feel like you have to ask everyone you come into contact with if they've got a vaccinated child?
Yeah, and parents should. After this, every parent should ask whenever possible if people are vaccinated, and if they're not, they should get their kids away. It's terrible. It's so horrible to just have to wait and see if your kid is going to get sick.
I mean, I don't want to be the kind of mom who's paranoid all the time. I'm still waiting to get my second set of shots. But the bottom line is, I feel like now I have to say, are you vaccinated? Because I don't want to have to put my son at risk for possibly getting this virus. I mean, because that's where we're getting at. Yeah,
it's not just paranoia. It happens. I mean, it happened to us. We didn't ask, and we exposed our son, and now we have to play the waiting game and just hope for the best.
One of my doctors said to me, that it was a big frustration for her because she can't not treat patients because they choose not to get vaccinated. But it's really hard for her because her obligation as a doctor is to keep her patients safe. And so now she's finding herself in a situation where she doesn't know which children are being exposed in her waiting room. And it puts doctors, I think, in a really tough place. So what would you want a politician? I mean, if you talk to the premier as a mom, what would you say to her? Do you feel like she has an obligation to protect other children at this point?
For sure. Children should be vaccinated. There's the harm that a vaccine can cause is less than anything the measles can do for the most part. Vaccines are safe. Measles is not safe. Measles can kill your child. Get vaccinated is what I would beg her to tell people.
But it is a big debate because when you talk to other parents, you get into this instant polarizing debate because they don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to tell anyone what to do. I would never tell you as a mother what to do unless it has an effect on my child's health. Then I feel like I can't help but say, hey, Heather, I think you should get your child vaccinated because you're putting mine at risk. And it's become really polarizing between moms and dads.
Right. I think that when people say, you can't tell me how to raise my child, I don't want to vaccinate, so I won't. But they miss the fact that their choice will affect me. They don't live in a bubble. We live in a community. When they choose not to vaccinate their child, they've forced me to not vaccinate my child as well. They forced me to keep my son isolated, to not go to work. They forced all these different things on us. It's not just a matter of mind your business, because it's all of our business.
So when is Noah out of the danger period?
The 20th of February.
I have to think that this is pretty scary.
It's horrible. It's horrible. It's horrible to wake up in the morning and to rush to him and make sure there's no rash, no fever, check him all day, check his temperature. He did have a rash yesterday. We think it's related to something else, but it's terrifying. We just don't know. We're really playing the waiting game, and it's the most horrible thing.
And right now, is public health in touch with you all the time?
Yeah, they're checking to see how he's doing. They called us yesterday. I'm sure I'll get a call today, maybe tomorrow. They want to make sure that we got him the immunoglobulin. Not much more they can do at this point.
So what would your message be? I mean, if you could convince an anti-vaxxer,
right,
what would you say to them?
Well, I mean,
because I don't get the sense that they really understand.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get the sense that anti-vaxxers understand that measles itself is far more dangerous than the vaccine.
Yeah.
I think we kind of forgot what measles posed to us, because in our generation, it hasn't been around.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a politician, I'm not a doctor, so I can't force people to get a vaccination, but I would say that measles is incredibly contagious. I believe it's more contagious than SARS, HIV, Ebola, and it could be deadly. It's the leading cause of death in children, and there's a vaccination. You can't cure it, but you can prevent it. So I would really urge people to get educated and to get vaccinated.
I guess you never thought a visit to the doctor's office would put you on the front lines.
No,
so you take a vested interest in this. All right, well, I'll continue following it, and I'm on the optimistic side that I think Noah will be just fine. But it's unfortunate that I have to put someone like you on TV, and as soon as, because we live in the same neighborhood, as soon as I knew that you had a story to tell, I mean, you put the face to it. And so I think it adds a lot of value, and I hope through education people understand that, you can do what you want, but if it becomes a bigger public health risk, it poses a danger to us all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thank you for coming in. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me,
Heather. And we'll, of course, update you on how Noah is doing. But we're going to continue this discussion because Dr. Brett Belchitz, who works on the front lines, he's been on here a lot. I mean, this is one of those issues that has really polarized people. He'll break down how big the threat is. Are we looking at an epidemic here? And what should the Premier be doing? So we'll talk about that coming up next. So how did we get to this problem of measles coming back? This whole anti-vax movement started, I think, back in 1998 when this medical journal published a paper declaring that measles, mumps, rubella, well, it caused autism, and it sent the world into a tizzy. Nonetheless, it was proved to be total rubbish. The doctor who was the author of this was stripped of all his credentials, but then this stripper, Jenny McCarthy, said it was true. And all of a sudden, everyone started to believe it, and this whole movement of Whole Foods mothers decided it was time to stop vaccinating children. And voila, here we are. Dr. Brett Belchitz joins us here. I don't know why we have to talk about measles. I don't know why I have to argue with people incessantly to get their children vaccinated. I'm not one of these people who goes around telling people how they should run their lives, and I'm not one of these people that would ever tell you how to parent. But when it comes to health of en masse children, and when it can pose a health risk to my child, I feel like I should have a say.
So there's a lot of issues. So number one, let's just really touch briefly on the vaccine and autism and that history right there. So there is no second side to this story. MMR vaccine does not cause autism. MMR vaccine has very few side effects. This is a very safe vaccine, full stop. And people in the anti-vaccine community, they will try to tell you that there are two sides to the story. They will say that there are even physicians that believe that the vaccination series can have dangers. I have yet to meet one physician in my 11 years of medical practice that is anti-vaccine. And whenever we ask people in the anti-vaccine community about who are these physicians that they're talking about, they struggle to identify even one. So there's only one side, and that's vaccines are safe. The other side of the equation is that these illnesses are deadly, and people have forgotten how deadly they are.
I think they just think they're itchy, and then you get a few bumps.
Well, people had read about them in newspapers and magazines from the past, but these were things nobody had seen. So they heard about measles, and we giggled about measles because we never, ever saw it. People forgot that measles is one of the #1 killers in the world outside of the developed world.
100,000 kids a year?
Huge numbers.
Yeah.
And so the death rate for measles is about 1 in 200 cases. And measles is one of the most infectious viruses we have ever come across. So it has a 90% infectivity rate. So if you are in a room or an airplane or a waiting room with somebody with measles and you are not vaccinated and they sneeze, you have a 90% chance that you will get measles,
so
which has...
Mom Heather, whose baby was in a room, I mean, she has every reason to worry.
Every reason to worry. So if there was measles in that room, her baby's obviously not vaccinated from what we've heard, 90% chance that they could pick up measles right there. So hugely infectious. So when you think about an agent here, 90% infectious, 1 in 200 death rate, versus vaccines where we talk about bad side effects being in 1 in a million range, you are absolutely, I hate to use the word, but you are foolish and you are stupid to not take that vaccine when you weigh the risks and the benefits here.
If you're vaccinated, like I was as a kid, it was like a no-brainer. Can you still get measles?
So the vaccine series is very effective. So it depends whether or not you've had one shot.
Because I know I had chickenpox. Now I'm trying to think, and I know I had mumps.
So the MMR series is 2 vaccines. So you get one shot around 1 year of age, and there's a booster shot that you get around 5 years of age. So it's thought for measles, it's incredibly effective. So the one shot at 1 year of age gives about 95% immunity. The second shot boosts that immunity up to 99%. So 1 out of 100 people who are getting that measles vaccine will have no immunity from the shot. So part of why we ask that everybody gets immunized is to protect, number 1, children who are too young to be immunized, like the cases that we're talking about. Number 2, people who have illnesses that make their immunization impossible. So people who are organ transplant recipients, people on chemotherapy, people who we cannot protect,
autoimmune,
right? And also those 1% of the population who don't convert from the vaccine. So we have this thing that everybody talks about called herd immunity. Herd immunity is just a fancy way of saying that there aren't enough people out there in the population anymore that are non-immune for them to pass it to each other because they're surrounded by so many people that are immune. So even if somebody somehow picks up measles from another country, everybody they come into contact with is immune, and you will never have an outbreak. And we've lost herd immunity because in order to have herd immunity for measles, we like to have about 95% of the population immunized. And the estimates vary, and one of the issues that we talk about what the government can do, we don't track well enough how many people are immunized.
Well, we haven't had to, but why would we have to? Because it has been gone since 2000.
Well, now I think we need to.
Well, sure. You know, I go to my pediatrician, love her. First thing she comes in and she says, you know, Alex, I am so frustrated. My job as a doctor is to protect my patients. And I've got anti-vaxxers here who aren't getting the shots, and they're mixing in with my clients. Now, I can't, as a doctor, make these people get a shot. I'm not allowed by law to not take them. So what are doctors supposed to do? It's a real conflict of interest when you've got a room full of kids who are vulnerable being mixed in with a bunch of parents that decide not to vaccinate their kids.
Well, I think there's a point here where we're going to have to take a big step back and re-examine the medical ethics of refusing these vaccines in children. So but if your child came into the hospital with a broken leg and you said, I don't believe in casting, I'm not going to cast that broken leg, I would call Children's Aid Society and you would be forced to take that cast. If your child came in with appendicitis, again, if you said, I don't believe in surgery, I think naturally it'll get better, again, I would call Children's Aid Society. Why are you allowed to take the chance of exposing your child to a 90% infectious illness that has a 1 in 200 chance of killing them? Why are you allowed to take that risk with your child? Now, if your child was an adult and could take charge of their own health, they could make that decision for their own health if they were a responsible adult. But for you to expose an innocent child to that risk, should we have the right? I think we need to re-examine that.
And is it going to happen? Because here's the thing. You know, the Premier has banned pit bulls. The Premier doesn't allow children under 18 to go into a tanning bed. The Premier has banned peanut butters. And I mean, you can't take a peanut butter or a peanut product into a school. You can't even take egg products into school because it's such a threat to a child's health. Where's the Premier on this? Like, measles are okay, peanut butter sandwiches aren't. I don't understand. We've got these outbreaks. I'm a public taxpayer. I pay for the school system. I should have a say, and I think other parents should have a say too. If you choose not to get a shot, that's your choice. But then you can't go to school. You can't go into a public hospital. You know, there've got to be some consequences here.
And I agree with you. So let's start with nationwide. So there are only 2 provinces in this entire country that require children to be vaccinated to go to school. So that's Ontario and New Brunswick. So what are the rest of the provinces thinking here, that they would actually say it's fine for you to go to school without vaccines? But
stop you there, because I had to fill out immunization forms for my child's schooling. But clearly we're not saying no to unvaccinated kids. So so then there's another issue, right? So in Ontario, it
is the law, supposedly, that to take your child to school, you must show proof of immunizations. But there have been numerous studies done to show that this law is not being tightly applied.
Yeah, people are getting somehow written out of it.
Well, Global News did an amazing investigative report about
Yeah.
a year ago to look at what were the actual immunization rates across a variety of Toronto schools. And the lowest performing school, and I wish this was an outlier, the lowest performing school was an alternative school in downtown
Yes.
Toronto, had an immunization rate of only 43%.
Yeah, it's scary.
So you want to talk about where does an epidemic start? It starts in a school like that. One child in that school gets measles, and now you're going to have a citywide and potentially a nationwide outbreak. So the fact that you have 43% immunization in a system where apparently people have to actually have an affidavit, a sworn affidavit,
Sure.
in order to not get those shots, to me those two facts don't go together.
Yeah,
It says-
too many politicians are signing off and giving, people a way out of this, and I don't understand how that's happening. There's no point in me even handing in an immunization record to my child's school if 75% of the other students aren't going to have to follow the rules. We either have rules or we don't, and I'm sorry. If you choose not to be vaccinated, that's your choice. But you should not be allowed to go into a public institution. You go homeschool.
Well, so there is this idea that we are going to allow people to say no to immunizations in order for that school requirement if they have a philosophical or religious or cultural reason why
Everyone's
they don't
gonna
want
have
vaccines.
one, though.
But this is what I'm going to say. So when we look at religions and cultures, there is not one religion that says it's against the religion to get vaccinated. So that's nonsense. There is no religious belief that says you
Right.
shouldn't get vaccinated. That's number one.
So
Number
I don't have a lot of
two-
time. I want to know
Yeah.
what are doctors in this province going to do? Are they going to stand up and demand that the premier do something? I mean, she's been very quiet on this. She's not said anything.
Well, I think we as physicians need to speak up even louder. We've tried every approach on this vaccine issue. We need to stand up louder to say, you're letting people get away with activities that are going to result in deadly outbreaks, and things need to be tightened up. We shouldn't be letting these kids into school. We shouldn't be letting people be exempted so easily the way they have been. The policies need to tighten up in a big way and soon.
In your opinion, are we heading for an epidemic? I mean, 4 cases in Toronto. We've seen clusters at Disneyland. Are we heading to an outbreak?
I think we are, as we see vaccination rates dropping. And what you have to know about measles, with that 90% infectivity rate, each person with measles, on average, infects 16 other people. Okay, so 4 cases here in Toronto very quickly turns into 64. Multiply 64 by 16 and then by 16 again. When we have a lot of people out there that aren't vaccinated, those 4 cases in a very short period of time will be several thousand if we don't actively keep it under control.
You start the petition with your doctor friends. I will hand deliver it. I just think there has to be a movement here at some point, because unless the premier is held to account on this or something's done, nothing's going to change.
Well, Alex, I hate to say it, I think it's going to take kids dying.
Yeah, I do too.
I think when that happens,
and until you told me the
change.
numbers, I told Heather, I said, "No, everything will be fine." But then you tell me the actual stuff, and I think, Jesus, if that's how easily spread it is, she has a reason to worry about her son.
Well, I think we all do.
All right, thanks. I think. Dr. Brett Belchitz joining me here. And so we'll continue this conversation because JJ McCullough posted something interesting on his Facebook. It's all about the approach to anti-vaxxers, and it created such a debate. Do we draw them in with honey, or is it a little bit of tough love here? We'll have this debate coming up next. So as we continue this discussion, a lot of anger is growing against as you've been hearing, against the anti-vaxxing movement, who are being blamed for bringing back measles, this killer disease. So JJ McCullough, who joins us now, you certainly caught my attention with one of your posts yesterday, and I saw it led to quite a colorful debate. And I think the point, and maybe I got it wrong, but I think your point was, I agree with vaccination, but I think it's how we approach the anti-vaxxers that's going to bring a resolution. It's better to maybe coax them with a bit of honey than scream and shout. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is my opinion, just because I feel like certainly in the last few days we've seen an enormous amount of backlash against the anti-vax movement, against politicians who are deemed to be sort of too conciliatory to anti-vaxxers. And I just feel that the tone has become extraordinarily harsh, extraordinarily judgmental, and I just feel like that this is in turn quite counterproductive if you're trying to persuade or change the minds of people who are already inclined to have somewhat conspiratorial, paranoid views of the world. I don't think the fact that, politicians, people in the media, people on television are just loudly telling them what to do and loudly telling them what a bunch of dopes they are is necessarily going to make them sort of change their mind about this kind of thing. So I do think, particularly as it's a public health issue, I think it's very important that we consider our tactics very carefully.
Sure, but the politicians aren't saying anything about it, so that's one thing. So let's put that aside for a couple of minutes. I just had Heather on, a mom, 11-month-old baby, took him to a pediatric clinic for one thing, and only to find out that for the next 3 weeks he's in isolation. And according to Dr. Belchitz, has a very big, like a 90% chance of getting measles, all because he was in the same room as someone else with measles. This baby can't be vaccinated, not because the mother didn't want to, he's too young. And so because someone else made that choice, this mother now has to sit and watch to make sure Noah doesn't get measles. How is that fair? I mean, this is a real serious health hazard for a baby.
It is indeed, and I heard both of those interviews, and they were both quite chilling in their own ways. But I mean, this just shows just how high the stakes are, and it just shows us that we have to take this movement very seriously. We have to consider the anti-vax movement as a serious threat to public health. And the question then becomes, what sort of tactics are we going to use to change the minds of a small minority whose personal decisions are having enormous consequences for the larger health of this continent and the people that live upon it? And I just think that, like, to have a strategy that is simply about berating them and telling them what a bunch of dopes they are, I don't think that is necessarily going to be the most effective strategy. And I mean, I think that frankly as well that the tone of a lot of the most activist people in terms of the pro-vaccination set have an unfortunate tendency to sort of carry themselves with a bit of smugness and a bit too much self-regard in a way that I think reminds a lot of people of the sort of smugness that you see, for example, on the side of some of the global warming sorts of people. You know, the idea is like, well, we have science on our side, and therefore you should shut up, and your concerns are dumb, and you're just a big, you know, just a terrible, immoral, horrible person. And I mean, I think that their behavior, certainly the anti-vaxxers are engaged in a terrible practice that has enormous health consequences, as we've just discussed. But again, like, I just don't know if that kind of attitude in dismissing them is necessarily going to be the most constructive, particularly since there is a lot of misinformation floating around there. And frankly, I believe that the government and the media deserve a lot of blame as well for sending mixed messages that have given the anti-vaxxer community a lot of sort of hooks to hang their hats on, so to speak.
Yeah, unfortunately, folks like Jenny McCarthy have been given a podium. I mean, even though all of the junk science has been, you know, proved, the doctors who said it was, you know, autism forming, it's all been debunked. But for whatever reason, it hasn't sunk in to this particular crowd of mom and dads who think that they know better than doctors. My concern is that, like Dr. Belchitz said, is that a child is going to have to die to kind of wake everyone up to say, geez, you know, maybe we need to rethink. And that's generally how we see change. It's in a reactive form where it's like, we will see a child die, and that child will then become symbolic of why we have vaccinations. I am not, you know, one of these people that will ever tell someone else what to do. Your body, your choice. But if it then becomes a huge public health risk to my child and to other people, then I have to say we have a stake. And so at some point, because we now have active measles in our community, the premier's got to step in and say, okay, it's your choice not to vaccinate, but you can't go to a public school, and we can't put other children at risk.
Yes, and I think that something like that would be a viable political strategy, certainly. But in terms of addressing the larger phenomenon of people that have these beliefs, I do think we need to sort of think about how we're going to, you know, basically teach them the truth of the situation. But I mean, again, the fact is that there is information out there that sends mixed messages. In both the United States and Canada, the government, or sorry, in both the United States and Quebec, I should notice, it's not in Canada, there are such things as vaccination compensation boards. So it is possible to get cash compensation for, you know, what you imagine to be side effects of vaccination. So the government does sort of recognize in its own sort of way this kind of myth that, you know, vaccinations are linked to illnesses. And there are, I mean, some of the facts that the anti-vaxxers cite are true. I mean, it is objectively true that there have been tainted vaccines in the past, and vaccine recipes have changed over the years. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that any of the symptoms that anti-vaxxers claim are associated with getting vaccinations are true, but the fact is that if you spend all your time on the internet and you don't necessarily see the big picture and you just read, you know, little snippets of this or that out of context, you can get a sort of warped view of the world, which is why I think that it's very important that we have a consolidated message. And I do think that, you know, this is a case in which the government should be spending a lot of money on propaganda, frankly. I know propaganda sometimes has a bad association. But I think that government propaganda can be effective when it comes to cases of public health. I mean, government propaganda has been enormously successful in diminishing the instances of drinking and driving.
Yeah.
It's been very successful on my generation on getting people to stop smoking, getting people to stop using hard drugs. So I do think that there's a case to be made here. And in addition to some of the things that you were suggesting, I do think that the government should really be doubling down on advertising and sort of public health initiatives to teach people the truth about this situation.
Yeah, look, there are risks of everything that we do in life. I mean, every time you leave the house, something could happen. But you wouldn't let your children play at the corner of a busy intersection. You wouldn't plant them in the middle of an intersection and let them play, because chances are they'll get hit by a car. I just don't understand why anyone would take a risk like this. Are we going to need a case of polio to come in to play here before someone realizes just how serious this is? I'm not kidding. My doctor told me that she has patients, anti-vaxxers, who are having measles parties and chickenpox parties where they bring a chickenpox child into the room and they let all the children play so that their children will get chickenpox. I don't understand how is that normal? How is that not child abuse? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's a strange little subculture, and it's sometimes difficult for us to relate to. Although on the other hand, I mean, I think that frankly, some of us as people on the right, as conservatives, have to have a message as well that is compelling to some of these people who come at this from a perspective of individual rights, who see this as an issue of personal freedom. And I mean, you've seen this in the way that some of the Republican presidential candidates are sort of playing footsie with some of these communities. Senator Paul and Governor Christie, and some other politicians as well, in a way that I think is abhorrent, but is also kind of understandable, because some of these anti-vaxxers are speaking a language that is familiar. They are skeptical of big government telling them what to do. They are skeptical of the corruption of the big pharma,
yeah, I
which
get that,
is
but they're
a
also
very
the first
powerful
people
industry.
that would be rushing to a hospital with a measles-ridden child saying, they're dying, help them. I mean, I understand that. I don't want big government in my life either, but when it comes to what we're facing now, which is possible, epidemics, the doctors are all really, really concerned about this. I find it bizarre that if I want to put my dog into a kennel or leave my dog at a daycare, I have to have full vaccination records, or they won't let the dog stay. And yet, when it comes to kids, we're just so much more, lackadaisical about it.
I think the biggest source of public ignorance is just really the fact that this is not, as you have said, is not an individual decision. It is a decision that you make at an individual level, but has massive consequences for broader society. And I do think that any sort of government propaganda, any sort of government message, I feel us in the media have a real, the impetus is on us to emphasize that as much as possible. As much as this, you may think of this as an issue of personal freedom, of personal liberty, of personal decision making, it ultimately isn't. It's a decision that has massive consequences for broader society. And as much as we have individual rights, we don't have individual rights at the expense of the health and safety of others. That is a basic balance and a basic trade-off that I think any, libertarian would acknowledge.
And that we agree on, sir. Your hair, by the way, is particularly large today, and I like it.
Oh, thank you. I think I need a cut.
Oh, no. Get out the Flowbee. All right, sir, I got to leave it there. JJ. JJ McCullough joining us here. All right, we'll continue this discussion. We'll see where it goes, and I'll keep an eye on little Noah, who I anticipate will have nothing but health.